Hello and welcome to Feely Finance. In today's video, I'll be discussing Bitcoin and whether or not it's a scam. In the course of this video, I'll present arguments by people who are bearish about Bitcoin and think it's going to go to zero. I'll also present arguments by people who are bullish about Bitcoin and think it's going to skyrocket in value. I'll give my personal opinion on Bitcoin and discuss whether I'm invested in Bitcoin or not and whether you should invest in Bitcoin. So let's get into it. So I'll start with the arguments against Bitcoin and the reasons why many people think Bitcoin will go to zero over time. So the principal argument against Bitcoin is that it's not backed by anything. It's not backed by anything tangible. It's not backed by gold and it's not backed by governments. So for example, the US dollar is backed by the Federal Reserve and the pound sterling is backed by the Bank of England. That's not the case with Bitcoin. It's not backed by anything. So people argue that it has no real tangible value. A further argument against Bitcoin is that it's not widely accepted as a means of payment. So if you go into a store to buy a coffee or a car, it's highly likely that a vendor will not accept Bitcoin as a means of payment. The argument here is that money only has value because people think it has value. So because people don't think Bitcoin has value and won't accept it as a means of payment, therefore it doesn't have value. So they're the two main arguments against Bitcoin and why many people think it will go to zero. Is that it's not backed by anything and it's not widely accepted as a means of payment. So now I'll discuss the arguments for Bitcoin and why many people think it will skyrocket in value. So the principal argument in favor of Bitcoin is that it's finite in number. This contrasts with the current fiat monetary system. So currently the central banks through commercial banks can just keep printing money, and this just devalues the money that's already in circulation. So if you look at the purchasing power of $1 today, for example, and compare it to the purchasing power of $1 50 years ago, it's massively diminished. So currently banks can just create money effectively out of thin air, and this massively reduces the value of your money, and this has just caused huge inflation over the past 50 to 100 years. So by removing that control from the government, inflation can effectively be eradicated, because if there's only a finite number of Bitcoin in circulation, then the cost of goods and services in Bitcoin should remain consistent and inflation is eradicated. So that is the principal argument for Bitcoin. A further argument for Bitcoin is that over time it will become the accepted means of payment. If Bitcoin starts to be accepted more and more by businesses, it may eventually replace fiat money and become the principal means of conducting transactions. If that does become the case, then obviously the value of Bitcoin will skyrocket from what it is currently. And they're the two main arguments in favor of Bitcoin. So do I personally invest in Bitcoin? The answer to that question is yes, I do invest in Bitcoin. So I actually started investing in Bitcoin around about 3 years ago now. I decided that I would allocate around 1% of my total portfolio to Bitcoin. I do see it as a relatively risky investment. It could end up going to zero, but I do definitely see the potential for it, the upside of Bitcoin. And I think it could end up skyrocketing in value, which is why I decided to allocate 1% of my portfolio to Bitcoin. It's currently worth more than 1% of my portfolio because it's gone up so much in value since I invested, but I'm not going to sell any of it. I'm going to continue to hold because I believe that there is a chance it will skyrocket in value. I'm also willing to accept the risk that it will go to zero. So in conclusion, do I think you should invest in Bitcoin? I think everyone should have some exposure to Bitcoin. I think you should invest a small percentage of your portfolio. How big of a percentage that should be will depend on your risk appetite. There is potentially could go to zero, there is also potentially could skyrocket in value. So how much of your investment portfolio you decide to invest in Bitcoin will depend on your risk appetite. Obviously things such as real estate and index funds are much more reliable and safer investments. However, I think there is huge potential upside with Bitcoin. So I personally invest in it, and I recommend that most people should have at least some exposure to Bitcoin in their portfolio. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.